Christ formed in you for the sake of others. Welcome to the Wild Way Podcast.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to A Slow Journey Through John. We are in the Explore episode of week 28, and as always, I am here with Jamie.
Hi.
How's it going for you today, Jamie? I already know the answer to this, but I think our listeners should know.
Honestly, I'm feeling pretty trash today. I'm in the middle of a 2-week French immersion intensive course, which means conversing in French for hours and hours for 2 weeks straight. So I've been busy translating all sorts of things from English to French, and I'm a little fried, so not batting 1,000 today. So we'll see how it goes. Sorry, everyone.
Is there a danger of you breaking out into French in the middle of our podcast?
Possibly. I'm really scrambled up right now, so who knows?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it was a good week in the podcast, and maybe we should just jump into our recap.
Well, let's do it.
So this week of podcast took us from grief all the way to glory. We're in the last half of John 11. And so first, Jesus meets human emotion. Martha brings Mary to Jesus, who falls at his feet, saying the exact same words as her sister. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And when Jesus sees her weeping along with all the other mourners, he himself becomes deeply disturbed and troubled, and then he does something remarkable. And if I were to say to you now, hey, Jamie, Jesus just did something remarkable, if you know this story, you might think I'm referring to he raised Lazarus, but that's not the first remarkable thing he does. The first remarkable thing he does is he cries. Jesus weeps, and so we're going to have some discussion about that.
So once when I was like an early Bible teacher at a secondary private school, I gave an assignment and they could select any passage or verse they wanted to memorize. I thought it was a great passage until some Yahoo looked up the shortest verse in the Bible to memorize, and that was the verse he chose. Jesus wept. So good for him. So
Good
great verse. He'll be thinking about that for the rest of his life, perhaps.
And it's an incredible verse to show the character of God as well. So
Absolutely.
a lot of power in those two words.
That kid, whoever you were who memorized that, may it never go out of your mind about that. That shows you who God is.
Yeah. And then the second thing from this week was after some more resistance from Martha, there's the actual miracle itself, the raising of Lazarus. And so there's this public prayer, and then Jesus shouts out with the manly voice that Carmen has shown us, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man, well, formerly dead man, emerges, still bound in grave clothes that other people have to remove. And then finally, we get the fallout of the miracle. The miracle divides people. Many believe, others inform the authorities. The religious leaders panic. They fear the loss of power, and they fear Roman intervention. And so the high priest Caiaphas declares, hey, it's better that one person die rather than the whole nation. And in doing so, he unknowingly prophesies Jesus' death. And from that day on, they plot to kill Jesus, and Jesus withdraws as the Passover approaches. And so we covered a lot of key thoughts and ideas that we're going to get into. But what stood out to you, Jamie?
Yeah, I think there's just so much in this half of the chapter to unpack, and for sure we're not going to even cover all the things that could be said today. Yeah, what stood out to me is something you said from the meditations in episode 193. You said something like, today we're standing somewhere between the stench and the glory. I love that. And I know we're going to unpack it later. What stood out to you from your studies of this half, or from what you recorded in the meditations?
Well, I just love how this passage was such a great example of both the humanity of Jesus, because he's there crying and grieving with his friends, but also the full divinity of Jesus, because he conquers death and he raises someone from the dead. So that's a pretty striking parallel. Yeah. So I think it would be good as we come into this week's passage, if we just back up a little bit to where we left off last week with Mary approaching Jesus. So why don't we start reading in verse 28 and go to verse 32.
After she said this, she went and spoke privately to her sister Mary. The teacher is here and he's calling for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to Jesus. He hadn't entered the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were comforting Mary in the house saw her get up quickly and leave, they followed her. They assumed she was going to mourn at the tomb. When Mary arrived where Jesus was, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died."
Okay. So, what catches your attention from that little passage?
Two things. Mary is surrounded by a bunch of Jews who are comforting her. And I think I mentioned this last week that Jewish people have a very communal approach to grieving. They will sit with a person while if someone has lost someone, they will sit with them for 7 days after the person has passed away to mourn and grieve with them. And then they walk with them for a period of a year. Just, you can see here that this existed even then, and that these Jews were here comforting her. And so they're also going to be witnesses to something pretty awesome pretty soon. That's awesome. And secondly, the different personalities of the sisters come through. Like Mary seems to be just maybe a little bit more emotional or something. And she runs to Jesus and dramatically throws herself at his feet. And Martha, she kind of kept like a cool head and a logical conversation. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. And they both say, "Lord, if you'd been here, Lazarus wouldn't die." So that both of them, like, they're expressing that they know that he could have healed, but it stops there for Mary. Mary doesn't move on. Martha, of course, has hope that he can do something even though he's dead, and Mary just stops there. And I wonder if she's just kind of leaving it as a accusation, like, "Hi, if you had been here, you would have saved him." She's upset at Jesus. I feel like she's angry at him, like, "Hey, like, what's up? This didn't even have to happen."
Yeah. Yeah. You get the sense, I mean, they're both expressing the same words, but Martha does seem a little more measured in her words and follows it up with hint of hope, whereas Mary just puts it all out there, says the same thing, and just leaves it there. We talked last week about how I'm kind of more reserved in expressing emotion to God than you are. And I'm just wondering if you could share with the listeners a little more about how you learned to do that, because you weren't raised in a home that encouraged you to express your emotions.
Yeah, and so that's exactly why I learned to express it to God. I found that God wanted to listen and understand me, and even if there was nobody else willing or able or wanting to hear or understand me, I felt like God did. And so I feel like in this situation, you'd be like Martha, you'd have a calm conversation that ended with, "Listen, because of you, he died, but I know you could do something." And you'd just be super cool about it. And I'd be probably upset and I'd be like, "Hey, I blame you. That's it, the end." But I probably wouldn't do the big throwing myself at his feet and crying because I'm not super emotional like that.
You're not into these big public displays
No.
of emotion. No, you're not. That's true. But in the end, I think it doesn't matter whether we approach Jesus in our grief like Martha did or Mary did. The important thing is that we approach him and that
Exactly.
we tell him what's on our mind. And Jesus, whether we come like Martha or we come like Mary, Jesus welcomes us into his presence and he joins us in our grief.
I think you need to have an understanding that Jesus is quite safe.
Yes.
And so, like, if you're aware that Jesus is safe, you're able to say whatever is coming, like whatever you need to say, and you trust, like, God. He understands your spirit, your intentions. He understands, and you're accepted and safe, even so.
Yeah, yeah, and he meets us as we need to be met. So like with Martha, he does have a bit of a practical conversation with her and he challenges her faith. But with Mary, he doesn't do that because it's not what Mary needs at that moment. Instead, he meets her in a very different way. Maybe we can read next what comes up.
But he that's how he operates. So if there's somebody a little more sensitive and there's somebody a little more stoic, that's going to have a different approach.
Absolutely. All right, so do you want to read verses 33 to 35?
When Jesus saw Mary crying, and the Jews who had come with her crying also, he was deeply disturbed and troubled. He asked, "Where have you laid him?" They replied, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to cry. Or, as my student knows, another translation simply says, "Jesus wept."
Yeah, I guess this one doubled the word
I know.
count.
I mean, this
would be too tough.
Too much.
Jesus began to cry. What do you think about that? What do you think about the idea of Jesus crying?
Do you know the first thing I thought of when I see Jesus crying? I mean, I love that he's sad, but also I love that that John included this because if you look at the whole picture of Jesus in the gospel, a real true picture of masculinity. Like you see that Jesus, he's tough, he's strong, but he's also deeply compassionate. He's willing to cry and able to cry. He cares very, very much. And I just think this is a really healthy picture of masculinity. And anyone who says that men should just be tough or be like saviors or something is missing key elements of what Jesus showed us.
I agree with that. And I think with John especially, we get both of those extremes of Jesus. Like we see him as the disruptor and the button pusher who is really like pushing up against the religious authorities. And then we also see him as the one who cries and who weeps and who enters into brokenness and feels the pain of others.
Yeah. So what's it like for you to think of Jesus crying?
I really love this image, in part for the reason that you gave, because it does present a healthy image of masculinity. But also, I love it because it gives us permission to cry. And what I mean by that is, I have come across many followers of Jesus who feel that they have to be living, quote unquote, in victory, and that they can't feel depressed, they can't feel sad, they can't feel negative emotions because they're supposed to be living in the resurrection victory of Christ.
Yeah, and so then I've seen this too, where Christians, they just cannot sit in the heaviness and the grief, and they'll spin it to something positive and hopeful, even though, I mean, sometimes you just need to sit and feel this grief.
Yeah. And this verse here gives us permission to do that.
Great.
I really do think it's amazing because he doesn't challenge Mary or tell her to stop crying. Instead, he joins her and he expresses strong emotion as well. But before we get to the weeping part, let's deal with the first thing that John says, where Jesus was deeply disturbed and troubled. Literally, he says he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. And the phrase deeply disturbed can also be translated as groaned. And basically, it doesn't mean sadness or compassion. It means this agitated, almost indignant emotion. So Jesus is upset about something here. And the question is, what is he upset about? And there's been a few suggestions by commentators. Some have suggested that he might be upset because these mourners came and invaded the privacy that he wanted with Martha and Mary.
Don't like that.
I don't either. Some have suggested he is angry or upset at the hypocrisy of the mourners themselves, who may have been putting on a show of emotion, which didn't reflect their heart, especially if they're the professional paid mourners who are just coming to express grief, but are not actually feeling it themselves.
I don't know. I feel like he'd be compassionate towards them who are trying to like comfort them in their grief.
Some have suggested he is upset at the lack of belief that Mary is displaying.
Nah.
I don't think so either. And then the other one, which is the one that resonates with me most deeply, and the one that I shared in the meditation, is that Jesus is indignant and angry at death itself. Like he, looking at this grief that death is causing in these people he loves, Jesus is indignant at the power that death has over humanity and the brokenness and the loss that death brings. And so right here before him, death is wrecking Mary's heart, and that angers Jesus, not at Mary, but at death itself. Plus, if you think about it, he himself knows that he's soon going to have to face death, and he's going to have to allow death to wreck him.
In like looking at this death scene, we know he's actually looking death in the eyes because it's right around the corner.
Yeah, exactly. And so there we have both this great love for his friends, and we have this great anger at the power and the presence of death, and it draws out this almost involuntary groan from deep within the spirit of Jesus.
I love that people have gone to all this like effort to make all these theories, and the one that I like the most is the one, yeah, sure, like maybe he's deeply groaned at the power of death at the moment, right? But is it possible that the reason he is groaning and feeling agony and feeling like agitated is simply because this is what grief looks like? Do you know what I mean? Like when we lose people we love, like this is what it looks like. We are deeply disturbed, agonized, indignant that this happened, and troubled. And so perhaps Jesus was feeling for the first time what the separation and the severing of relationship that comes along with death. So maybe it was one of those theories, but maybe he was just really experiencing what it meant to be human in a very profound way. And what I like about that is, if that's the case, then now, like, there's nothing he doesn't truly understand. We have a God who has grieved. We have a God who understands what it's like and who walks with us when we grieve in a way that others can't. And like when you're trying to be strong, you're strong, you're strong, you're strong, and then you see somebody else break down and you lose it, right? Like maybe that was just a very human moment.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a great thought. I like that. And I love the idea that Jesus isn't just idle while we're experiencing our own pain and suffering. Like he doesn't just witness it from afar. So when he sees our lives touched by the presence of sin or death, that it actually does trouble him. But again, just want to repeat, we said it in meditation, said it just now. Jesus isn't angry at us. He's not angry at Mary. His anger is directed to the principalities and the powers that hurt us and enslave us. And that's really the whole motivation for the cross. His love for his creation and desire to see creation liberated from the very thing that is hurting it and enslaving it.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. But we see more than just troubled indignation here. John also says Jesus was overcome with emotion and he wept. And like we explained in the meditation, he uses a different word in verse 35 than he does in verse 33 when he talks about Mary weeping or the mourners weeping. The word he uses for them means this loud expression of grief, like it's this wailing grief. It's the same word he uses, or that Luke uses when he describes Jesus weeping over Jerusalem, as these loud, racking sobs that are coming out of him. But verse 35 word, where it says Jesus wept or Jesus began to cry, it means burst into tears. And I think I said in the meditation, the N.T. Wright version is he wept like a baby. And so the picture here is that Jesus was so overcome with emotion that he just burst into tears. I mean, I think that's an incredible image. This God who we think is always, we always picture him as like in control of the situation. He's got everything handled. And here he's so overwhelmed, he bursts into tears.
Yeah. I think it's that verse is really beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. And it might be uncomfortable for us to think about. It would have been really uncomfortable for the Greek readers of John's gospel to hear, because to them, the primary characteristic of God was that God didn't feel any emotion whatsoever. And so this idea of God being swayed with emotion would have been difficult for his original audience, but also for us today. But here we have it. Jesus is crying. And like we said in the meditation, the only explanation that really makes sense here is he sees, like you said, he sees all his friends in tears. He sees all his friends in pain.
But he's in pain.
Yeah,
he's in pain. That's what I think.
Sure, but he may be moved with pain himself for the loss of Lazarus, which could, or I mean, I'm not sure about that, just because he's about to raise Lazarus, but he's definitely moved because he is a compassionate presence in this place, right? Like the compassion is joining with others in their suffering, and so he is so compassionate that the tears of others moves him to burst into tears himself.
I respectfully disagree. I think
Okay.
he's moved to tears because he's heartbroken. He himself is feeling the pain. It's not the brokenness and the pain of the others that he's like just being compassionate about and crying. I think he's crying because Lazarus was his friend.
Yeah.
He misses him, even though he knows he's going to come back in a minute.
Yeah, and it could be both and.
Could be.
Yep, for sure.
What do we know?
What do
Very
we know?
Little.
Maybe our listeners have an opinion.
Yeah, listeners, honestly, like the things of God are so huge. We're acting here like we know. We don't know.
Yeah,
we don't know.
I can only speak from my own experience, and I don't remember if I shared this story on our podcast yet. So, listener, sorry if you're hearing it for the second time.
We're full of very few stories.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, but this whole idea of Jesus weeping and joining us in our grief, it was revolutionary to my relationship with Jesus. My parents divorced when I was young. I don't know, I don't even remember, 7 years old, 8 years old, somewhere around there. And the way I found out that my parents were having problems in their marriage was that in the middle of the night one night, I woke up to hear my parents in the next room fighting, like arguing so loud that it woke me up. And the things that they were saying to each other were like, they were heartbreaking to me. It was the first time I'd ever heard my parents fight, basically, or even have any kind of argument. And it was loud. And I heard this and I just started to cry and cry in my bed. And my parents eventually heard me crying. My dad came in and he kind of like patted my back and said, "Hey, don't worry, it's going to be okay." And then, like, literally 2 days later, or maybe even the next day, he moved out.
Not
Uh,
gonna be okay, Dad.
not
But
going to be okay.
anyway, we've processed that trauma. It's okay.
Yes. So anyhow, fast forward now into my 20s and I'm pastoring, and I was really struggling with this idea of compassion because I would see people who were in pain and I wouldn't feel anything. I wouldn't feel any kind of compassionate pain on their behalf. And so I went away on a day-long retreat, and I distinctly remember praying, and I said, "God, why do I have no compassion? I want more compassion. Why do I not have it?" And in my prayer and in my memory, God took me right back to that moment where I woke up in the middle of the night to hear my parents fighting just before they divorced. And I was feeling all the emotions again. I was crying again like I did before. And then this is one of the very few times where I really feel like I heard God speak very, very clearly, not audibly, but clearly in my heart. And he said, "Nick, when you were there in your bed crying, I was right there with you. I cried every tear that you cried, and I felt every bit of pain that you felt." And side note, we weren't a Christian family. I wasn't even a follower of Jesus, or my parents weren't either at that time. And so, yeah, so he said, "I felt all the pain you felt. I shed every tear that you shed." And then it was just like he healed that memory. His presence was so strong with me, and that just the knowledge and the thought of God there with me, crying my tears, feeling my pain, and just sharing it with me was a very healing moment for me.
Thanks for sharing that, Nick. I think you've painted a picture of what this verse means. I think what this verse means is that I believe it's a picture of Jesus weeping with us, alongside us. And so, whatever anybody is going through that's brought you to tears, you're not the only one crying about the pain and the injustice and the suffering. There's somebody with you also crying who's holding
Mhm.
you up.
Absolutely. Yeah. Jesus is with us in our darkest moments for sure. Okay, why don't we move on now and go to Jesus at the tomb and read verses 36 to 44.
Yeah, just before we do, I just want to point out like he's already said, "I'm the resurrection and the life," right?
Hmm.
And it's cool that you say that, right? Anybody could say anything, right? But it doesn't really mean anything unless like you are resurrecting someone or bringing someone to life. So like he's said it before, and here's where he's proving it to be true. And this is a pattern that's happened a few times in John, but he
Yeah.
says it before and now he's about to prove that it's true. So
Yeah.
here's what happens. Starting in verse 36. The Jews said, "See how much he loved him." But some of them said, "He healed the eyes of the man born blind. Couldn't he have kept Lazarus from dying?" Jesus was deeply disturbed again when he came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone covered the entrance. Jesus said, "Remove the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said, "Lord, the smell will be awful. He's been dead 4 days." Jesus replied, "Didn't I tell you that if you believe, you'll see God's glory?" So they removed the stone. Jesus looked up and said, "Father, thank you for hearing me. I know you will always hear me. I say this for the benefit of the crowd standing here, so that they will believe you sent me." Having said this, Jesus shouted with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his feet bound and his hands tied, and his face covered with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Untie him and let him go."
Wow.
There's so much there.
So much there. So what catches your attention?
Just, again, like there's all the people are saying, like they're all muttering behind Jesus's back and being like, what is up with this? Like, couldn't he have stopped him from dying? And I feel like we mutter about that about Jesus too sometimes. Like, couldn't he have stopped this or that or
Mm-hmm.
whatever? Yeah. And then, secondly, the fact that there's a stench, I think it's proof that Lazarus is really dead. He's not just like in a coma or something. What's happening here is somebody was really dead and then they're coming back to life. So he didn't just wake up or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And also, I'm thinking about Lazarus. Like, what have you ever thought about what it might be like for Lazarus? Lazarus, he's been dead for 4 days, wherever he is, and he's just lying there, and suddenly, like, he's alive. But to my understanding, which again is very small, part of the Jewish death practices is that you'd rub spices and ointments over the body, and then you'd wrap it really, 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 really tightly with cloth. So there he is, dead, wrapped in that cloth like a mummy or something. And then imagine waking up and being like, oh my gosh, I can't move, I can't breathe, I can't see.
Yeah.
I bet you it was scary. He probably didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, that's a really, I've never thought of that. I hope he wasn't claustrophobic.
Yeah, it's just like, just imagine waking up and you're
Yeah.
all in that. It's so
Yeah.
weird.
What I want to point out is something that we said in the meditation. That's, a few verses ago, like you said, Jesus had his great I am statement, I am the resurrection and the life. And then he specifically asks Martha, do you believe this? And she responds with her own amazing declaration, this model exemplary declaration in John's gospel. Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, God's son, the one who is coming into the world.
I don't think she had any concept that that he was going to raise him from the dead, but she was expressing faith in something.
Yep.
But it wasn't what Jesus was talking about.
Yes, but she's expressing this exemplary faith. And so you'd think that when Jesus comes to the tomb and says, hey, roll away the stone, that Martha would be on board and be like, oh.
Or she would have been like, hey, Mary, don't worry.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
She didn't get it. She didn't know.
Yeah.
She wasn't picking it up.
You'd think she's like, okay, something good's going to happen here. But instead, she doesn't. She resists and says, hey, Jesus, there's this decomposing body in there, in case you forgot.
Because she's logical.
Yes, and the stench is going to be awful. He's been dead for 4 days. And I remember reading, I think it was Scott McKnight, and he said, like, she has not yet caught on that Jesus, the life giver, the body raiser, can also be a stench remover at the same time.
Do you think, though, that she thinks he's going to raise him from the dead? Do you think she's got that? Because I think Jesus is saying something at one level and she's receiving it in a way that Jesus, like, she doesn't get it.
No, I agree. I don't think she expects that, because I don't think she would have complained about taking the stone away and the smell if she thought that Jesus was actually going to raise the body. So yeah, and what Martha provides for us is actually a pretty good example of how we tend to act as followers of Jesus. Like, because we express faith in one moment, and then we resist in the next moment.
The waffling.
Yeah, the waffling back and forth.
And the pushing back. Like, one day you can be like, yes, God, you're feeling something really great, and God's like, yes, I want you to go and do this. And you're like, yes, yes, yes. And then the next day you're like, what?
Yeah. And even when we have faith that God is going to answer our prayers, we sometimes say, hey, in our mind, this is the way you're going to answer my prayers. And when he operates outside of our expectations, we're like, hey, what are you doing there? This doesn't make sense. And
didn't we agree it was going to look like this?
Yeah, exactly. So whatever Jesus is doing, it's not making sense to Martha. And so she's like, are you sure you know what you're doing here, Jesus? This is a smelly body in there. But knowing this means that when it does happen, it's nothing for us to be really upset about. Like,
when what happens?
When we waffle between great faith and then some resistance, and faith and resistance. Because what Martha teaches us is that moments of confusion or resistance don't mean that we've failed. It means that we're growing in faith. So the analogy I use is giving us jackets that are too big for us. He says, okay, this is what I want you to do. This is what I want you to go. This is what this is my guidance for you. And it's like he gives us a jacket that is too big for us. And we're like, I can't handle this. What are you talking about? And he says, don't worry, you're going to grow into it. And we grow in faith, we grow in a relationship, and we begin to fit that jacket.
And then we start busting out of it.
But then God doesn't say, okay, that's great. He says, okay, here's a new jacket.
Yeah.
And he gives us another jacket that's too big. So he's always expanding our faith, and he's deepening our maturity, which means we're always going to be bumping up against these moments of resistance, because he's gonna take us to those places and then take us through those places.
Yeah, and it's not comfortable.
No.
But that has been the pattern of my life. Like something God will be like, here's this, and I'll be like, oh my gosh, no, 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 like, don't you know me? I don't have skills. I can't do that. There's no way I'm gonna do that. And he's like, just do it. And then I do it, and then I do it again and again and again and again, and suddenly I'm comfortable. And then he's like, cool, you're comfortable, great, here's something else you should do. And I'm like,
Yep.
no, 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 that's way too big. I'm no way I can do that. Anyway, pattern keeps going on and on. And one of the reasons we called this the wild way is because like the journey with God is an adventure. Like it's not something tame. It's not something we can control. It's God always being like, nope, this is the path. Go over on this path. And it's wild and you never know where it's going to end up, but it always ends up in the place you needed to be.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's where the trust comes in. And hopefully we're not kind of bumping up against the same things today that we did 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But I think the point we're trying to get across here is that God is always going to be moving us to deeper faith. And so it means we're always going to be coming up to these places of resistance. And so when they happen, we shouldn't say, "Oh, I'm a failure as a follower of Jesus." We should say, "All right, I'm a growing follower of Jesus." And that's where the trust hopefully will kick in, and
Yeah.
we'll begin to push through those. And like you said, there will come a time when we're on the other side and we're like, "Okay, I'm comfortable here." And God says, "Here's your next jacket."
Yeah. Listeners, we'd love to hear of any story where you felt like God was giving you something far too big for you to handle or to be able to do, and how he brought you through it.
Yeah, we'd love to hear that. Okay, let's move on. Jesus mentions seeing God's glory, and David Ford points out the first sign, the water turned into wine, was said to have revealed his glory, and then the disciples believed in him. And now, again, at the last sign, once again, we have this reference to seeing God's glory. So, first sign, last sign, both bracketed by this reference to God's glory. And I like this thought from the meditation. This is where we stand in the moment, somewhere between stench and glory. Scott McKnight talked about stench, David Ford talked about stench and about glory, but I like this idea of we are living right now somewhere in between those two things.
What do you mean?
We stand somewhere in between humanity at their worst, myself at my worst, which is the stench, and then, as with God's grace, myself and humanity at its best, which is moving toward glory. And we're always going in between those two things, our best and our worst.
But even also just like valleys and mountains, like really difficult times and really great times. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so Jesus says, remove the stone, and after some resistance from Martha, the stone is removed. And what I want to point out here is that Jesus prays for the first time in John's gospel. And he says something very short, very to the point, but he does it publicly. And the reason he prays publicly, he says, is in his prayers, is not for his benefit, not for Lazarus's benefit, but for the crowd's benefit, because he wants them to believe. It's so that they will believe. They'll see God's glory and believe.
And they'll know that God is with Jesus.
Yes, yeah. And so he prays this prayer. He shouts out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And again, he shouts that out, but the loud voice isn't for the sake of Lazarus. It's not like, Lazarus can't hear him. Lazarus is in some distant corner of Sheol or something. He didn't do it because he needed to for the sake of power, like a shouted prayer is more powerful than a whispered prayer, which is not true. He did it because, just like his prayer to the Father, he wants the crowds to hear and believe.
So he said it a little louder for the people in the back.
Yeah, for the people in the back, he shouted.
So that way there can be no confusion about what's going on. It's Jesus that is the resurrection and the life.
Absolutely, yeah. And of course, Lazarus does come forth, and there has been a lot of conjecture about, okay, if he's wrapped up in grave clothes, how does he come out of the grave? And so people have said hopping, shuffling, gliding, I've heard.
I've heard people be like, he just came out of the grave like praising and celebrating. And I think that is very historically inaccurate. Yeah.
Exactly that. He definitely wasn't raising his arms. That's for sure. Because,
Jesus says,
take off
okay,
the grave clothes.
somebody get those grave clothes off of him.
Yeah.
And then he was just there naked.
Yeah.
Nobody ever thought of that.
Yeah. I mean, okay, yes, you're right. But it is important to point out that he does tell people to take off the grave clothes, because there are two times in this miracle where he gets people involved. The first time is when he tells people to roll away the stone, which, if you think about it, it's like, well, why? Like, if Jesus has the power to bring Lazarus back from the dead, he certainly doesn't need someone to actually like physically roll away the stone. Like, he could do it himself.
But again, this is a thing that he wants everybody to see and know. It's that this isn't a mistake. It's Jesus. He wants them to be involved.
And I think that's the key point, is that God always is looking for partnership with humanity. We've said this before. Like, God does not work on earth without some kind of partnership with human agents. There, whether it's our prayers or like the Mother Teresa quote, like, we're the hands, we're the feet, we're the mouth. And so God wants our involvement in his mission. And so he will always make ways for us to be involved, even if it's just, hey, roll away the stone.
Well, I mean, he left his mission on earth that Jesus started to a bunch of fishermen. It wasn't some brilliant, like, intellectuals that did this, that could speak well. It was people that he was going to empower to be able to, put on that big jacket.
Yes. Oh, that's a great. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. He didn't leave it with the religious elites. He left it with a bunch of fishermen who he was going to empower, and who in the end would befuddle the religious elites, because they are operating with the wisdom and power of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the second thing that he does to get people involved is he tells people to unbind Lazarus. And what I really like is this quote from David Ford. I read a part of it in the meditation. I'm going to read the whole thing now. He wrote, "The fact that even after the incredible miracle of resurrection, Lazarus needed help removing his grave clothes is a reminder to followers of Jesus today that, having heard the voice of the shepherd calling us by name, we may still need to be liberated from beliefs, attitudes, habits, addictions, constrictions, traumatic experiences, self images, or whatever else hinders full living, keeping us bound up in things that smell of death and deprive us of freedom. And that liberation usually needs the attentive help of other people." And so to unbind him and let him go is a watchword for love in action.
Wow. I mean, that's such a beautiful quote. I love that. But I also think that that whole unbind him and let him go, that is the mission of God's people on earth. Our job is to unbind people and let them walk in the freedom and walk in that abundant life, eternal life that Jesus is offering.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the gospel.
I think this is important for us to remember, because coming to Jesus doesn't mean that my life is cleaned up perfectly automatically right away. There's still growing to do, there's still maturing to do, there's still freedom to discover and live in, which is one of the reasons Paul, I believe, with great wisdom, says, don't put a new follower of Jesus into roles of spiritual leadership too early. And because we need to grow, we need to remove those grave clothes, those things that smell of death after we come to Jesus. And it takes a while to do that. And the worst thing, again, this is just my opinion, but like, one of the things that infuriates me is where you read of some kind of celebrity, whether it's an actor or a athlete of something, and they come to Christ, and immediately within days or weeks, the church platforms them and says, start telling people about Jesus.
Yeah.
And they're not ready for that yet. They're not ready. And so we push people into the limelight before they are ready. And sometimes as a result, disaster happens, and they and the church loses its witness.
And I can think of at least 3 celebrities that has happened with, and even just in the past 5 years. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think of myself. When I first became a Christian, I was coming out of years and years of just living however the heck I wanted. And my the people around me they were terrible people. Well, with the exception of a couple of good friends, but I was hanging out with some really weird and dangerous people and involved in all sorts of stuff. Yeah, I did not have good character. And if anybody had been like, here's a platform for you to speak about Jesus, I probably would have done you can still be empowered by the Spirit. Anybody can be empowered by the Spirit to do good things, as we said, but it doesn't mean that you have any character or the fruit of the Spirit. And it took it takes many years to kind of unwrap all those grave clothes of what you bring into your new life with Jesus.
Yeah.
And we like to cling to the things that we knew, and sometimes Jesus is like, that is really unhealthy for you, that's really bad for you, that's really damaging you, you got to let that go.
That's a stinky grave clothes.
Yeah.
Let it go. I got another jacket for you. Just before we move on to the fallout from this miracle, I just want to take a moment to return to Jesus's insistence to Martha that resurrection is something that happens now rather than in the future. It's a present reality. It's not just a future reality. And so that means that Jesus's death and resurrection aren't just a historical blip that happened 2,000 years ago. It is a present reality to us right now. So I think of Colossians 3:3. You died and your life is hidden with Christ in God. So even before we literally die, we are already dead in Jesus's death and alive in his resurrection. So Ephesians 2 says, since we are dead in the mystery of Christ's death, all of us also right now have been made alive together with him and raised up together with him and seated together with him in the heavenly places. So right now, wherever we are listening to this, Jesus's death and resurrection are present realities for all of us.
Yeah.
We are always in his death and we are always in his resurrection.
It's awfully confusing to understand that. These are the verses I've been thinking about for the past week because it's come up in my little devotional book.
Yeah.
I wish people understood all these spiritual blessings that we have.
Yeah. Yeah. We've already died and we've already been raised.
Yeah. We're already in heaven.
Yeah. Seated with Jesus wherever he is. Yeah.
Be a real big seat.
Okay, I think we should, we're getting long in time, so let's quickly wrap up this chapter. We'll read verses 45 to the end, and then we'll just say a couple things about it.
Therefore, many of the Jews who came with Mary and saw what Jesus did believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Then the chief priests and Pharisees called together the council and said, what are we going to do? This man is doing many miraculous signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. Then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our people. One of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, told them, you don't know anything. You don't see that it's better for you that one man die for the people rather than the whole nation be destroyed? He didn't say this on his own. As high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would soon die for the nation, and not only for the nation. Jesus would also die so that God's children scattered everywhere would be gathered together as one. From that day on, they plotted to kill him. Therefore, Jesus was no longer active in public ministry around the Jewish leaders. Instead, he left Jerusalem and went to a place near the wilderness, to a city called Ephraim, where he stayed with his disciples. It was almost time for the Jewish Passover, and many people went from the countryside up to Jerusalem to purify themselves through ritual washing before the Passover. They were looking for Jesus. As they spoke to each other in the temple, they said, what do you think? He won't come to the festival, will he? The chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that anyone who knew where he was should report it so they could arrest him.
Okay, thanks. That was a long passage.
Yeah.
So we could summarize first just by saying the miracle, like everything else Jesus has done, it divides people. We have many people who believe, which was the whole purpose of the miracle, right? Yep. That's what he says. He prayed those prayers and said those things so that they would believe. But other people, they inform the authorities. And these religious leaders panic. They think they're going to lose their power. They think that Rome's going to come in and intervene. And we mentioned meditations that John doesn't mention the Sadducees by name because of his late date of writing, and they weren't around when he actually wrote the gospel. But Most commentators see any mention of chief priests as a mention of Sadducees because almost all the chief priests were Sadducees.
And the Sadducees were the people concerned with running the temple.
Yes, yeah. And so we shared in the meditation that the Sadducees were different from the Pharisees. The Sadducees were mostly wealthy, they were priestly elites, they were connected to the temple, and their focus was on like temple rituals and political power. And the Pharisees, they were lay scholars and they were teachers of the law. And so while the Sadducees kind of focused on the temple, the Pharisees focused on the synagogues in the out and around, and they taught a lot about personal piety, and they were the ones with the purity laws. And normally they were arch enemies. Like they believed some very different things. The Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection, and the Pharisees did. So you can imagine even the fact that Lazarus had just been raised. That's kind of embarrassing to their theology that Lazarus is walking around. So normally these guys did not work together, but they found a common enemy. They found this hatred of Jesus, and they decided that they would work together to kill him. But the interesting thing here is the exaggeration there, like, oh, the whole world is going to follow him. And I love what Scott McKnight says about this. He says the religious leaders speculate rebellion, riots, and a coup. Exaggeration and hyperbole always gains ears, especially when it is all folded into apocalyptic images. And then he brings it into the present day and he says, politicians attempt to shift a public with apocalyptic fear, meaning, if you don't vote for me, our country, our democracy will collapse. And we've heard messaging like this around the world in several places.
Actually, probably it wouldn't matter if you were listening to this podcast 10 years into the future. You'd probably still be hearing this kind of messaging from somebody.
Absolutely. And the warning for us in this is that we can cling to political interests and national interests, just like the Pharisees and the Sadducees were doing, even at the cost of a deeper trust in Jesus. It is a huge red flag to connect any sort of political affiliation or even a national flag to our worship of God. Church auditoriums are not the right place to display a national flag. It's no problem to be patriotic. It's just that what's first?
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say, because what I have noticed in the past nearly a decade at least, there's lots of people who are political or nationalistic first and Christ followers second. So, like, the values of politics or patriotism are winning out, they're far stronger pull than the values of Christ, which I find both fascinating and so infuriating, and it keeps me up. It keeps me up at night, honestly. And in some cases, like, politics and nationalism and Christianity are woven together as if they're all one thing. And so, if you follow Jesus as Lord, he really needs to be Lord over everything else, including over the politics, over your love of country. Otherwise, those other things are idols. Following Jesus means you put at the forefront what matters most to Jesus. If you're making politics and you're making nationalism more important than actually putting boots on the ground work into following Jesus and living the way he said, making a priority of the things that he made priority, then are you even following Jesus?
I I think that's a really good challenge, and we're not saying that a follower of Jesus can't love their country,
No.
can't serve their country. What we're saying is that when the values or the goals of the country take over the values and the goals of God's kingdom, that is wrong. That's Christian nationalism, and it needs to be flipped back where God's values, God's kingdoms always comes first. And we would be willing to even speak out against the country we love if it is doing something that is pulling people away from God's kingdom and not helping God's kingdom come to this place.
And just a reminder, one of the way that we help God's kingdom come to a country or a place is to be taking care of the marginalized.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, as you read, Caiaphas speaks out. unwittingly prophesies what was going to happen. And from that day on, they are plotting to kill Jesus. And so Jesus once again retreats from the public sphere. All the tensions at a boiling point. Passover is approaching. There's an arrest warrant out for him.
The situation is tense. And just before we wrap up, I'm wondering, because we've got in 2 chapters, we see Judas betray Jesus, and we get to see him a little more in chapter 12. And so right now, I mean, the people are calling out, like Jesus is now in outlaw status, and the people are saying, or the leaders are saying, okay, anybody with information about his whereabouts, come and tell us. And I wonder where in this, all of this, Judas started being like, yeah, I should go tell somebody. I wish we had more information about Judas, because all we see is that he gets up from the table and goes and betrays him, but we don't see the backstory.
Yeah, and that's a really good thing to wonder. That's a great question. And the interesting thing is, even though he's at outlaw status right now, in just probably 5 verses, like comes the triumphal entry. And this is where he comes in and everyone just loves Jesus for 5 minutes. And
he raises people from the dead.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So why don't we wrap up with our takeaways? What are your takeaways, Jamie?
I just have one takeaway.
Okay.
Listeners, is there something in your life that feels like it's too big or too stretching, or you're not good enough, but you feel clearly that this is the next step for you, but you're too afraid or you're too insecure? Are you willing to take a step on that path, trusting that the God who has called you onto that path is going to see you through to the end? That's all.
Okay. Great takeaway.
How about you?
I got a couple. One is just a reminder that Jesus enters our grief and our brokenness with us. And also that even coming to faith, or even resurrection in Lazarus's case, still requires this ongoing liberation from those death clothes that bind us.
And it's not like a thing that happens in a year.
Yes.
It's a lifelong thing of getting rid of the things that are holding you back, pushing you down. Yeah.
And then lastly, maybe just an encouragement for our listeners that to have, like you were just talking about, to have this faith that right now Jesus is the resurrection and life presently for you right now. And so if you are in the grave, if your dreams are in the grave, if your brokenness has brought you to the point of death, if no matter how hard you try, you cannot get your life back on track and you never will be able to, the encouragement here is to reach out and grab hold of the resurrection and the life who has been with you all along through the ups and the downs and will not let you go. And so don't let him go, no matter what. Don't let the resurrection and the life go. Just as Jamie said, believe, trust, wait for the new life to come. And it may not look like the life we expect, but resurrection never does.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay.
Fire hose of stuff today. We could have talked so much longer, but
totally.
We're limited.
Yes.
By this time frame.
Yes. But thank you, listener, for sticking with us to the very end of this podcast. If you have, if you're hearing me right now.
If you're hearing us right now, give us a signal.
Yeah.
And also, of course, a signal could simply be send us a hello. Shoot us an email at podcast@thewildway.ca. Tell us your thoughts. Tell us your experience with this podcast. Tell us anything that caught your attention this week or this episode.
Or you can leave a comment on our social media at Go the Wild Way.
Look for the week 28 post. It recaps everything that happened in the meditations this week. And you can just throw your comment in there, no matter when this is, even if you're not following along with us concurrently.
Absolutely. So thank you for listening, and we will see you all next week.
Bye.
A Slow Journey Through John is made possible by our donors who generously support the creation of Wild's spiritual formation content and the creation of Wild Way parishes. If you would like to help financially support the Wild Way with a tax-deductible donation, please visit thewildway.ca and click Support Us.